Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad that you've joined us for this special broadcast of the webinar, Skin to Skin Care After Birth, So Many Reasons Why It Matters. Today's webinar is in honor of International Kangaroo Care Awareness Day, and we'd like to tell you a little bit about the two organizations that are bringing this webinar to you today. These webinars are brought to you as a joint initiative between the Preemie Parent Alliance and NPA's Family Advocacy Network. Each of these organizations is dedicated to the proposition of working together to improve family-centered care. We've joined together to do these webinars as an effort to help educate our community together, parents and providers, to learn more about how we can provide the best possible care, both during and after our stays in the NICU or in the hospital. While we invite you to find out more about our two organizations, right now we'd like to find out a little bit more about you today. So we're going to launch this poll right now that should appear on your screen. And we ask you to take a moment to tell us who you are so that we can better adapt our upcoming presentations to you. I'm going to wait just a few seconds longer. Three, two, one. I'm going to close the poll and let you know that today it looks like about 3/4 of our attendees are providers from the healthcare profession, and about 1/4 of them are parents who are here with us today. Again, we'd like to thank you for everything that you're doing for families, and we really appreciate that you've taken the time today to join us. Because this is a pre-recorded webinar that I'll be launching in a moment, I want to let you know that you can listen to it anytime today. In fact, when I show you our websites, you'll be able to go to the website that is linked under Skin to Skin Care and listen to this recording at any point throughout today or tomorrow. After that, it will be put into a different library where you can access it for a fee, unless, of course, you're a member of either one of our organizations. If you're a member of our organizations, then you have access to our webinars in continuum. This is the website that I mentioned, nationalperinatal.org/skin-to-skin, where you can go and access additional resources related to today's webinar. You'll also see underneath that the websites of our two organizations. That's where you can go to find out more about becoming a member. I just got a technical note that tells me that we probably need to go back a couple of slides and relaunch, that maybe you were hearing the audio, but that you weren't seeing the slides. So again, this is our welcome today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Our presenter is Dr. Raylene Phillips. Here's the screen that I wanted to share with you, sharing the missions of our two organizations. This is where we launched our poll. And again, to recap, right now we have about 3/4 of our attendees are healthcare providers and another 1/4 identify as parents. Thank you for coming. Again, this recording will be available through the next day or two in celebration of today, May 15th, Kangaroo Care Awareness Day, and thereafter for free to any members of our organizations. And that is the website again, where you can find additional resources, and underneath it, the websites of our two organizations. Right now, I'm going to launch into the recording of our website The recording lasts for an hour. Like I said, you're welcome to listen with us live. If you have any questions, please submit them through your attendees question box, and we can pass those questions along to our presenter, Dr. Phillips, who said that she is more than happy to answer any questions that you have or follow up with you about any of the things that were presented today. And now we launch our webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. I am very happy to be participating with you in the celebration of International Kangaroo Care Awareness Day. I have no financial conflicts of interest and nothing to disclose, and I will not be discussing any drugs or products off-label today. What we are going to do today is to be talking about the subject of skin-to-skin contact after birth and why it is so important to mothers and their babies, no matter when they are born, full term or preterm. Now, we won't be able to cover all the evidence that supports this care practice, but we will touch on the major areas of focus. My goal is to convince you that how a baby is welcomed into the world matters. Now, I don't think that will be a difficult task for those on this webinar, but perhaps you will get some ideas that will help you to convince others who are not quite so sure. I really hope everyone comes to understand that the first hour after birth is a unique and special time, literally a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and that how this time is spent may have both short-term and long-term consequences for baby and mother. There's a great deal of evidence from research and what we've learned from being with babies that helps us understand how and why early experiences can make a very real difference. Now, we can't talk about skin-to-skin contact without acknowledging one particular individual who has shaped my thinking and inspired my passion for this topic. While there are many from whom I have learned a great deal about skin-to-skin contact, it was Dr. Niels Bergman who first opened my eyes to the neuroscience and the neurobiology of breastfeeding and skin-to-skin contact. As a champion of keeping mothers and babies together whenever possible, he is one of my greatest personal heroes, and I know I am not alone in that sentiment. So on this celebration of International Kangaroo Care Awareness Day, I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Bergman for all he has shared with me and with the world. The first part of this presentation is geared towards full-term babies, for whom no medical intervention is needed at the time of their birth. This, of course, represents the vast majority of births. We are acutely aware that not all births happen in the way we hope, plan, and sometimes babies and mothers can't be together during the first hour after birth. So later in this presentation, we will discuss how we can reconnect mother and baby in skin-to-skin contact as soon as possible in those situations. But as long as mother and baby are both stable, there are specific things that we can do to make a baby's entrance into the world a more welcoming experience. And there is strong evidence to suggest that it matters enough for us to make the effort. Skin-to-skin contact, or kangaroo care, is one of the most evidence-based care practices we have for newborns and their mothers. We will touch on 5 of the many benefits of early postpartum skin-to-skin contact for stable, full-term babies, many of which also apply to preterm infants, just in different ways. So how does early postpartum skin-to-skin contact improve physiologic stability for mother and baby? We will start with the obvious. We all know that the womb is the natural habitat for all unborn mammals. It's where development begins. The uterus, the placenta, and the umbilical cord provide everything that the unborn baby needs in optimal circumstances. But what some seem to have forgotten in our medicalized world is that after birth, the mother's body takes over these roles. And the mother's chest and the mother's milk now provide everything that the womb once provided: warmth, protection, nutrition, and support for optimal oxygenation, and much, much more. There's strong evidence that mother is not simply one of several equivalent options in supporting newborn stability, but barring unusual circumstances, mother is the one and only place where all the stable newborn's needs are met. Being skin to skin with mother is where all newborn mammals want to be. Everywhere you look in nature, mothers and babies are as close together as they can get. Let's look at some of the reasons why this is probably not just a happy coincidence. There's good research to document that skin-to-skin contact of the newborn with mother stabilizes respiration, oxygenation, and blood pressure, maintains temperature and glucose levels at normal levels for age, reduces crying and stress hormones, and increases early breastfeeding initiation. These thermal images show increased blood flow to the lactating breast, which, in addition to supporting the milk-making process, also provides warmth. We rely on this with premature infants during skin-to-skin holding and call it thermal synchrony, but it's just as important for the full-term newborn who has just exited the warmth of mother's womb into a relatively cool delivery room environment. Mother's body provides everything that the normal newborn needs to adjust to extra-uterine life. What's amazing is that each breast can independently regulate the baby's temperature. One breast can warm a cool baby, while the other can cool an overly warm baby. While baby is being stabilized on mother's chest, much is also going on with the new mother. Early skin-to-skin contact with her new baby increases maternal attachment behaviors, initiating changes in her brain that can later actually be seen and measured by MRI. Attachment is so important for survival that nature has not left it to chance. Biochemical activators in our brain's reward circuitry trigger maternal caregiving, and these activators are all increased by skin-to-skin contact. Oxytocin is one such hormone that has been well studied and is often even called the love hormone, but it's actually the ultimate multitasker because it contracts the uterus, decreasing the risk of postpartum bleeding. It releases colostrum and later milk, and it increases relaxation and caregiving activities and bonding, facial recognition and attraction, and in rats at least, it's been shown to increase monogamy. Multiple studies during the 1970s and 80s examined the effects of early postpartum skin-to-skin contact, because the standard practice at that time was for mothers to briefly view their newborns at birth, and then babies were taken to the nursery while mothers recovered from birth and were brought to mothers every 4 hours for feeding. In these studies, a novel intervention was a brief period of skin-to-skin contact immediately after birth, before the babies were then taken to the nursery. And with as little as 15 minutes of immediate skin-to-skin contact, the study mothers were found to be more comfortable at the time of discharge in handling their newborns. They were found to be more relaxed with their babies. They even smiled at them more often than did mothers whose babies had been taken away immediately after birth, which was the usual practice. And these results lasted well beyond the neonatal period. At 3 months, the mothers who had immediate skin-to-skin contact after birth spent more time kissing their babies and looking at their faces. At 1 year, they even held their babies and touched their babies more and had positive speaking interactions more often than did mothers who had not spent time with their babies immediately after birth. They kept more follow-up appointments and had increased breastfeeding durations. In one study, the duration of breastfeeding doubled from 6 weeks to 3 months, which was a profound difference at that time, and all with just 15 minutes of immediate skin-to-skin contact between mothers and newborns. A more recent study confirmed that maternal and infant effects of early uninterrupted skin-to-skin are still apparent 1 year later. These included more positive mother-infant interactions and increased infant self-regulation. Early skin-to-skin contact also protects the newborn from the negative effects of separation from mother. Now, in the last century, we have been conducting what many fear is a very dangerous social experiment, because never before in history have newborn infants been routinely separated from their mothers. In times past, they simply would not have survived. But when birthing changed from mostly home to mostly hospital, most mothers were given medications that made them deeply sedated and often unconscious at that time. So newborns had to be cared for by others in a separate place, away from their incapacitated mothers. And little thought was given to the effects of this routine separation on babies, mothers, families, or society. But we can no longer ignore the vast amount of research documenting the negative effects of separation from mothers. Normal term babies are born ready to interact. You can see in their eyes that they're taking in their surroundings with alert awareness. They're particularly ready to interact with their mothers, with whom they've been physically, hormonally, and psychologically connected for their entire lives so far. Until the cord is cut, mother and baby are literally a single biological organism. And for many more months, the mother-infant dyad is a single psychobiological organism. Gallagher writes that mother and offspring live in a biological state that has much in common with addiction. When they are parted, the infant does not just miss its mother, it experiences a physical and psychological withdrawal from a host of her sensory stimuli, not unlike the plight of a heroin addict who goes cold turkey. Now, this analogy helps us to understand why a baby protests with such vigor when separated from mother. Indeed, from a baby's perspective, separation from mother is life-threatening. Protest is the universal mammalian infant response to separation. It is an instinctive response to being in the wrong place, which is outside the newborn's natural habitat, mother's body. From a teleological perspective, it's a dangerous experience for newborns to be away from their mothers, their source of warmth, nutrition, and safety. In any other place, there is a potential danger of freezing, starving, or being eaten by a predator. So all baby mammals instinctively protest with loud cries and intense activity. And if you've ever been around newborn puppies or kittens, you know this is true for other species of mammals as well. The purpose of this protest is to attract mother's attention so that she can notice and rescue them from the dangers of being away from her immediate presence. There's a common myth that crying is good for newborns. I've heard some say, keep them crying, it opens up their lungs. But it actually takes a very brief cry to open the lungs, and continued frantic crying actually impairs normal lung functioning. It increases intracranial pressure, it jeopardizes the closure of the foraminal valley, and initiates a cascade of stress reactions. Dr. Christensen from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, found that babies separated from their mothers had 10 times the number of cries and 40 times the duration of crying in babies who were skin to skin with their mothers. Despair is the universal mammalian infant response to prolonged separation. The baby gives up and crying eventually stops. Intense movement ceases and the infant becomes still. Now, this is also instinctive behavior, but this time, the purpose is to avoid attracting attention. Like the fawn in the forest, the baby becomes very quiet and very still. When babies stop crying after prolonged separation, it's not because they're now okay with it. It's simply a survival technique, and all systems slow down for prolonged survival. Temperature drops, heart rate increases, and metabolism slows. And for some infants, especially preterm infants or even late preterm infants, this process tips them over the edge and we see hypothermia, bradycardia, and hypoglycemia. Now, protest by itself is not harmful to the developing brain unless it is prolonged and repetitive, but despair is harmful to the developing brain. The baby monkey on the left has been separated from its mother for 3 days, and an entire symposium has been devoted to studying the association between maternal-infant separation and depression in mammals. This is such a concern in the world of animal research that a report was published by the Scientific Committee on Animal Health and Welfare in 2002 entitled The Welfare of Non-Human Primates Used in Research. The report documents the profound impact of separation from the mother in the infant primate, the biphasic response of protest and despair, and the physiological disturbances in the regulation of heart rate, temperature, sleep patterns, cortisol secretion, and the immune system. The recommendation for research primates was that there be no separation from mothers for 12 to 18 months. Otherwise, the research monkeys became unable to tolerate normal touch, became pathologically violent in adolescence, and totally unfit for further research. A sobering conclusion and food for much thought. Hundreds of research studies have used maternal-infant separation of animals to study the effects of stress on various organ systems. In this particular study, piglets were separated from their mothers for 2 hours a day, and on days 12 and 56, this list of parameters was measured. Results showed a significant decrease in weight and immune function, and an increase in stress hormones and their receptors, indicating both functional and structural brain changes. Baby rodents who were separated from their mothers for only 10 minutes twice daily on days 8 to 10 were found to have changes in brain function in the hippocampus and amygdala, the stress centers of our brain. And there were fewer changes if they could hear their mother's voices in the same room than if they were completely separated, out of sight, sound, and touch. These brain changes were found to persist into adulthood. In this 2009 study of mare-foal attachment, the authors make a case that horses are actually a better model for mother-infant attachment studies than infants with litters because horses usually have a single offspring. They show early preferential bonding and attachment behaviors, and they have faster development, going from birth to adolescence in only 12 months. So in this study, the control animals were left undisturbed with mother after birth until the first suckling, while experimental animals were handled by a human gently but firmly in mother's presence for 1 hour before being allowed to suckle. What they found was perfectly analogous to the protest despair response described in primate research. The newborn foals initially struggled and trembled, had increased respirations, clear signs of stress, and then they became motionless, but maintained high tone with no relaxation. After their release, their first standing was often delayed, as was their first suckling, and many of them had inappropriate suckling patterns at first, chewing on the teat or making sucking motions into the air or toward the human handler. All animals from both groups were kept in the same pasture and observed for any differences in their behaviors. What they found was that the experimental foals showed many signs of insecure attachment. They stayed much closer to their mothers, they played less with their peers, they were less curious, and most disturbingly, they were more aggressive towards their peers. At 7 months, when they were weaned with a temporary separation from their mothers, the experimental foals were less adaptable to change, protesting much longer than foals who were not handled at birth. After 1 year, now in their adolescence, when they were permanently separated from their mothers, the experimental foals still kept more distance from their peers and continued to show more aggressive behaviors. Dr. Graven, a neonatologist who specializes in developmental care of newborns, reminds us that it is a serious mistake to assume that the principles derived from careful animal studies do not apply to human infants. The risk of suppression or disruption of needed neural processes is very significant and potentially lasts a lifetime. Speaking of neural processes, much research has been building over the last few decades that babies' brain development is significantly influenced by the quality of their interactions with primary caretakers. Have you ever wondered why other species of mammals are able to stand immediately after birth and follow their mothers and are able to actively cling to mothers to stay in contact? Human newborns are much more helpless at birth than other species of mammals, and this is because humans are born very neurologically immature. Dr. Niels Bergman has pointed out that in most primates, the brain grows in utero until it reaches about 80% of full adult size, and then birth occurs. And then the brain grows the last 20% to full adult size. In humans, however, birth takes place at 9 months gestation, which makes human birth about a year too soon in comparison to other primates. Human infants are exceedingly immature at birth from a neurological standpoint in many other organ systems. Human infants essentially need to complete gestation outside the womb, not unlike baby kangaroos. A full-term newborn has a full 12 months of gestation to complete. Dr. James McKenna, an anthropologist who has studied the newborns of many species, has noted that at birth, the human newborn is the least neurologically mature primate of all and is the most reliant on physiological regulation by the caregiver for the longest period of time. It is important to remember this fact, that even full-term babies are still very immature neurologically. Skin-to-skin contact and breastfeeding are the means whereby the immature full-term infant continues gestation outside the womb. Now, in the first 10 to 14 weeks of gestation, fetal brain growth is determined largely by genetics, but very quickly, fetal brain growth becomes an active process that depends on experience. We know that the fetus has well-developed senses of touch, proprioception, and smell, and these senses connect directly to the amygdala via the prefrontal orbital pathway, which is the first and essential part of an efficiently regulated and organized right brain. A fascinating aspect of fetal brain development is that the right brain matures faster than the left brain, and sensory experiences of newborns are disproportionately stored or processed in the right brain. Trevarthen noted that this difference in right brain development can be seen in surface features from about the 25th gestational week, and this advanced development persists until the left hemisphere shows a postnatal growth spurt starting in the second year, which is when usually we start seeing speech develop. Dr. Alan Shore, a neurobiologist at UCLA who studies infant behavior, infant brain development, says that attachment experiences facilitate this experience-dependent maturation of the right brain. Touch is especially important. When a baby is in skin-to-skin contact with mother or father, nerve impulses travel to the brain that activate the amygdala via the prefrontal orbital pathway, thus supporting the maturation of this important part of the brain. The amygdala, of course, is part of the limbic system that is involved with emotional learning, memory modulation, and activation of the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight mechanism. Dr. Shore says that areas of the amygdala are in a critical period of maturation in the first 2 months after birth, and therefore in early postnatal life, tactile input is critically important for normal brain maturation. Dr. Shore also tells us that in early postnatal life, maintenance of critical levels of tactile input is important for this normal brain maturation, and Dr. White asserts that the baby must spend most of its time in its mother's arms to get the full benefit of her sensory experience. Have you ever noticed that most mothers cradle their babies on their left when not feeding, and sometimes, of course, when feeding? Someone has studied this and found that over 80% of both right and left-handed females cradle babies on the left side. You see it often in art. It was found that males have no preference until they become fathers, but over 80% of fathers also cradle their babies on the left. Could there be an instinctive reason for this preference? Neurobiologists have noted that in the left cradling position, maternal signals are given to the infant's free left ear and processed by the right hemisphere, which is more advanced, of course, at this stage of development. And the baby's signals also enter mother's left side and are processed by the mother's right brain. Dr. Shore explains that tactile stimulations facilitate the flow of information from the infant to the mother and from the mother to the infant. In this way, the child is using the output of the mother's right cortex as a template for the imprinting or the hardwiring of circuits in its own right cortex that will come to mediate its expanding affective capacity. For this and many other reasons, a newborn has a basic biological need for contact with mother. Mother is meant to be the baby's regulator, or first regulator at least. The dyadic interaction between the newborn and the attentive mother controls and modulates the newborn's experience or exposure to environmental stimuli. And in this way, the mother herself is a regulator of the baby's internal homeostasis. Dr. Shore and others in this field have determined that attachment relationships are formative partly because they facilitate the development of the newborn brain's self-regulatory mechanisms. Mother is intended to be the baby's first regulator, and through mother-infant interaction, the mother modulates the sensory input that the newborn is exposed to. The attentive mother soothes the overstimulated baby, and by doing so, helps the baby to learn to self-regulate. Each time this happens, the baby's brain makes synaptic connections that support pathways of homeostasis. In fact, this regulatory function of newborn-mother interaction may be the essential promoter for the development of synaptic connections during the establishment of functional brain circuits. And this may be the mechanism by which the infant learns self-regulation. Dr. Shore maintains that early personal events can positively and negatively impact not just brain function, but actually impacts the structural organization of the brain. He says that as if the brain is designed to be sculpted into its final configuration by the effects of early experiences after birth, and these experiences are embedded in the attachment relationship. This makes sense because if a baby is born into a hostile environment, that baby needs extra cortisol receptors to provide adrenaline, to stay on guard for survival. But if a baby is born into a safe and secure environment where all his needs are met, then he does not need all that extra cortisol and can concentrate on growing and thriving and being curious and developing trust in his ability to interact safely with his peers. So whenever you see a baby and a mother interacting and communicating with eye-to-eye contact, touching, vocalizing, listening to each other, this is not just a nice interaction, although it is that indeed, but it is more than that. Think of it as active brain development, the process of creating synaptic connections and wiring a newborn's brain to learn self-regulation and maintain homeostasis. I've spent a great deal of time talking about the impact of mother-infant attachment and touch on brain development because I think they're probably the least understood and appreciated effects of early skin-to-skin contact between mother and newborn. But if the attachment relationship is indeed a major organizer of brain development, then the determinants of attachment relationships are important far beyond simply providing a fundamental sense of safety and security. The bottom line is whatever supports mother-infant attachment supports infant brain development, and skin-to-skin contact in the first hour after birth or any time after that does both. In addition to the benefits we've already discussed, early postpartum skin-to-skin contact also affects breastfeeding rates and duration. All mammals have instinctive behaviors at birth, all with a single purpose, to breastfeed. All baby mammals are born to breastfeed. And in the animal world, however, it is the newborn who is responsible for initiating breastfeeding, not the mother. As I was training to be a lactation consultant, I used to wonder why puppies and kittens and all other mammals never needed a lactation consultant. I wondered why are human babies the only mammals that need so much help to breastfeed that an entire career has been devoted to it. It turns out that early feeding instincts are activated most optimally when babies are in the right place. And the right place for all our mammals is where the milk supply is. And for human babies, that is mother's chest, the place of warmth, nutrition, and safety. Now, we've known for some time that when skin to skin, the newborn displays an impressive and purposeful motor activity, which, without maternal assistance, brings the baby to the nipple. Here is a newborn who is placed skin to skin with mother immediately after birth. We see one of the immediate effects of oxytocin with the release of colostrum. The infant, who is just minutes old, turns towards one of the breasts, finds the nipple with no assistance, spends a little time getting acquainted with the nipple, then opens her mouth wide and self-attaches. Activation of this instinctive behavior initially requires skin-to-skin contact. It quickly becomes a learned behavior, but in the very beginning, it is all instinct. So actually, all newborn mammals do know how to breastfeed at birth if they're in the right place, which is skin-to-skin contact with mother. Now here's what happened when one hospital started implementing skin-to-skin contact after birth. The x-axis is time and the y-axis is percentage. The blue line represents the percentage of mothers who intended to breastfeed their babies, and you'll notice it's quite low, but that was true at the time in this particular location. The green line represents the percentage of babies who were breastfeeding at the time of discharge, which is our goal, and the pink line represents the percentage of babies who went skin to skin with their mothers at birth. When this practice was started, suddenly the number of babies who were breastfeeding at discharge began to increase. And soon there were more babies breastfeeding than mothers who had intended to breastfeed. I've actually seen this happen myself. Sometimes we have a mother who has no intention of even trying to breastfeed, but does agree to have her baby skin to skin immediately after birth for all the other benefits of skin to skin contact. And of course, the baby will instinctively look for the breasts, and sometimes mothers will change their minds and decide to give breastfeeding a try. Now, it was this DVD that first introduced me to the 9 instinctive stages of newborn behaviors, and I was delighted and amazed by what I learned. The primary message of the DVD is that when a baby is in skin-to-skin contact after birth, there are 9 observable newborn stages happening in a specific order that are innate and instinctive for the baby. And within each of these stages, there are a variety of actions that the baby may demonstrate. However, the stages are still recognizable and unique, and it is very fun to see the babies going through them. The 9 stages are the birth cry, relaxation, awakening, activity, resting, crawling, familiarization, suckling, and sleeping. Notice that there are 7 stages that come even before suckling. If the newborn is not allowed to experience all of these stages, suckling may not be done correctly simply because the baby's not ready. You will see how each stage contributes to the awakening of the baby's senses in his own time and at his own pace. And letting the baby go through these in an unstressed, unrushed manner may be the mechanism by which we found that babies were more self-regulated 1 year later. The first stage is the birth cry, which of course occurs immediately after birth as the baby's lungs expand. Now this is the only internet-based photo that I have. The rest of the photos were taken at our hospital, and I have been given permission by the mothers to share them for educational purposes. The second stage is the relaxation stage, which begins when the birth cry stops and usually lasts about 2 to 3 minutes. During this stage, the baby is very quiet and still. So still and quiet that our NICU nurses, who were used to prolonged crying when babies were on the warmer and separated from their mothers, were initially concerned that these babies were in secondary apnea. For cesarean delivery, section deliveries, singleton babies are placed in transverse position on mother's chest. But the surgeon for these 37-week twins really wanted the mother to have this experience with her babies, and of course mother wanted it as well. So the surgeon was willing to secure the sterile drape as close to the umbilicus as possible to give us a little more room. And of course, even singleton births can happen in this manner. The deliveries were uneventful, and both babies were vigorous in crying, and both went skin to skin immediately after drying, and both immediately stopped crying as soon as they were placed skin to skin with mother as they entered the relaxation stage. The third stage is the awakening stage, which usually begins about 3 minutes after birth. And during this stage, the newborn exhibits small head and shoulder movements, opens his eyes, and shows some mouthing activity. Here we see twin A in the awakening stage, while twin B is still in the relaxation stage. The fourth stage is the activity stage, which usually begins about 8 minutes after birth. And during this stage, we see more stable eye movement, eye opening, increased mouthing and sucking movements, as well as some rooting. Twin A is making a great effort to look up at mom, who is talking to him, and twin B has now entered the awakening stage and is beginning to open up his eyes. Bright out here. Both babies are in the activity stage now with head movements and upper body movements. Baby A kept sticking his finger into his nose. They reached out and touched each other's hands, but my camera wasn't quick enough. Baby B is grasping mother's chest here, and I want you to notice how far their heads are from mother's neck, because this will change. Stage 5 is a resting stage, and the baby may have periods of rest in between other stages. Now, we used to think when the babies were in the resting phase that they were done. Clearly, they didn't know how to find the breast, and obviously they needed our help, so thank goodness we were there. But now we know that we just need to let them rest, and they will move on to the next stage. The 6th stage is the crawling stage, which usually begins about 35 minutes after birth. The baby approaches the breast during this stage with short periods of action, usually pushing with the feet. This results in reaching the breast and the nipple, and this is what we have often called the breast crawl. And when there are twins in the OR, there's not much room for crawling, so the babies propelled themselves closer and closer to mother's neck, and we had to gently slide them down so that they could use their instinctive pushing behaviors to get back up to mother's neck. But it was at this point that the surgery was finished, and we needed to move mom and babies to the recovery room. Now, it does take an extra person for each baby to hold them securely on mother's chest during the transfer to the gurney. But both babies remained in skin-to-skin contact with mother, and their instinctive behaviors were not interrupted. If we had lifted them off of mother's chest, they would have immediately protested with loud cries and intense activity. And when placed back in skin-to-skin contact, we would have started all over again at stage 2, relaxation. And then they would go through each stage again, a bit faster the second time around. But if possible, why not leave them with mother and not provoke this extra stress if it's not necessary? In the recovery room, the babies had more room and reached the breast with no problems, and began the 7th stage, the familiarization stage, which usually starts around 45 minutes after birth. There's a wide range, I might point out, but these were just the means in this particular study. During this stage, the newborn becomes acquainted with the nipple by licking and touching and massaging mom's breast. This activity also causes a spike in oxytocin, which helps to contract the uterus and prevent hemorrhage. The familiarization stage could last for 20 minutes or more, and this is the hardest stage for nurses and lactation consultants to stay out of the way and give the newborn time to figure out how their tongues work in air and gravity. We know that at first the tongues of newborns are high near their palate and kind of flat, and that makes it difficult to latch. And if we try to put them on the nipple at that time, it makes it more difficult for them. But later in the stage, they curl their tongues and drop them lower as they open their mouths wide to latch. The 8th stage is suckling, and the newborn takes the nipple, self-attaches, and suckles. This stage usually begins about an hour after birth for the baby who's not overly medicated. This is the actual first unassisted latch for twin A and twin B, two textbook perfect latches. And both boys were breastfeeding in the first hour after birth. Now, this mother and father could not stop explaining how different this experience was from the C-section that mother had had 2 years before. At that birth, her baby had been taken from her and brought back several hours later, and she had a very difficult time establishing breastfeeding. And we frequently hear this story about a previous C-section with routine separation and a baby that seemed confused about latching when reunited with mother an hour or 2 or 3 later. Much like the newborn foals when they first tried to suckle after being kept away from their mothers for 1 hour after birth. And parents are amazed at how easy this baby latches when allowed to go through the 9 stages of newborn behaviors immediately after birth, or actually the 8 before suckling. Watching this process is so empowering to parents. I wish you could listen to this mom and dad's delight and amazement as they watch their obviously brilliant and talented newborn accomplish her first breastfeeding all by herself. Mom kept saying, "This is so amazing," and Dad said, "This is the raddest thing I have ever seen." The 9th stage is sleep, and most babies fall into a restful sleep about 1.5 to 2 hours after birth. After all, birth is difficult for them too, or can be. These instinctive behaviors stay with babies whenever they are skin to skin during the first 4 months after birth, as long as the other primitive feeding reflexes remain, such as sucking and rooting. Using these instinctive behaviors when skin to skin to assist in breastfeeding is especially useful in the first few postpartum days when mother and baby are still getting to know each other outside the womb. The skin to skin contact should continue. During this special time, it's not just a baby that is born, a family is born. Baby, mother, and father are meeting each other for the first time outside the womb. In our household, we have chosen to call this time after birth the sacred hour, because every culture has ceremonies for special events that are considered sacred for that culture, events that are highly valued as important, deserving great respect, like weddings, baptism, rites of passage, etc. And in most cultures, no one would presume to interrupt a wedding ceremony for routine business. Now, if one of the wedding party is fainting, then of course we interrupt the wedding, but not for routine business. The first hour after birth is one of those sacred times that should be honored, protected, and cherished. Now, as important as we know skin-to-skin contact is, it is even more important to emphasize that safety comes first. There are often even more concerns for safety and stability in the operating room than even after vaginal birth. Skin-to-skin does not include safety of baby or mother. And one of the most important factors in reassuring staff that skin-to-skin can be done safely after birth, either vaginal birth or in the OR, is to make it clear that everyone has veto power. Anyone who has a concern can interrupt skin-to-skin to evaluate and establish stability or safety of either baby or mother. Again, even though we know skin-to-skin is very important and usually improves the newborn's and the mother's stability, we do not do skin-to-skin at all costs. And it's very important that someone be watching the baby in that first hour to be sure that the baby's nares are visible, that the baby's skin is pink, and that the baby is breathing normally. If someone is watching those 3 things in the first hour after birth and periodically after that, then most babies will be doing fine. When we began this practice, we were inspired by the experience of San Francisco General Hospital, where they introduced skin-to-skin for just 15 minutes in the OR after C-section birth and published their results in 2011. right about the time that we were getting this practice started at our hospital. By aiming for 15 minutes in the OR, they increased their rates of skin to skin within 90 minutes after birth from 20% to 68%. And while they reported their results in terms of supplemental rates, by converting the numbers into exclusive breastfeeding rates, which is what the Joint Commission is interested in seeing, we can see that these rates were highest if babies got skin to skin in the OR. They were lower if babies got skin to skin in the recovery room, but not in the OR, and much lower if babies got no skin to skin within the first 90 minutes after birth, even if they were eligible to do so. Now, at the University Hospital where I work, all babies born by vaginal birth now get at least 1 hour of uninterrupted skin-to-skin contact. But in the first year of our quality improvement project, where we were increasing our rate of skin-to-skin after birth, only about half of the babies born by C-section got the entire 1 hour of uninterrupted skin-to-skin. This is due to staffing issues, and I'm happy to say that we are making progress in that, but all babies got at least 15 minutes. In spite of this, after just 1 year of our practice change, we found that our rates of exclusive breastfeeding at the time of discharge had increased from 28% to 55%. Now it's about 65%. We also found that skin-to-skin, that C-section babies who did get the extra hour of skin-to-skin had about 3 times higher rates of exclusive breastfeeding than those who hadn't. Now, in a smaller community hospital that we also service, all babies get at least 2 hours of uninterrupted skin-to-skin contact after both vaginal and cesarean birth. This hospital opened in 2011, and this is the only model they know. And coupled with excellent lactation support, this hospital consistently has over 80% exclusive breast milk feeding at time of discharge, and often greater than 90%. What we learned at our hospital is that leaving babies undisturbed with mother gives the newborn time to find mother's breast and self-attach at his or her own pace, with no rush and no stress. And this increases mother's confidence in her baby's ability to latch and in her own ability to breastfeed. For nursing staff, knowledge about the 9 instinctive stages is kind of like a roadmap, giving them guidance and reassurance that assistance is usually not necessary and sometimes can even interfere. Nurses have said to us, this takes all the pressure away from us. We don't have to teach babies how to breastfeed, just keep them in skin-to-skin contact. Now, we know that sometimes babies do need a little extra help after birth, but skin-to-skin contact usually helps to activate their instinctive behavior so that whatever assistance we give them actually has some extra help. Now, what about premature infants? When born significantly preterm, infants can seem too unstable to have direct skin-to-skin contact with their mothers. And we know some babies, both term and preterm, do indeed require aggressive resuscitation and ongoing therapies to make early skin-to-skin or kangaroo care impossible until they're more stable. But is that true for all of them? It's easy to see from this illustration how the brain changes from 10 to 14 weeks gestation. But notice just how much it changes from 22 weeks to 40 weeks, the very weeks that preterm infants are under our care in the NICU. This graph illustrates the changes in fetal brain weight with increasing gestational ages. Look at the difference between 24 and 34 and 40 weeks gestation. These changes in brain volume are occurring in our NICU every day. Once again, Dr. Bergman reminds us to ask the question, if a full-term infant is born with 12 weeks of gestation required to compared with the majority of other species, or 12 months of gestation required to compare with the majority of other species at birth, what if gestation required is 14 months instead of only 12 months? Skin-to-skin contact is essential to babies who are born prematurely. Skin-to-skin contact in breastfeeding or breast milk feeding are still the means by where the preterm infant is meant to continue gestation outside the womb. Skin-to-skin contact is the natural habitat for preterm infants in several species of mammals. We are celebrating Kangaroo Care Awareness this month, and most of us know the history of kangaroo care, which started with Dr. Ray and Martinez in Bogota, Colombia. But what is often goes unnoticed is that they practiced late kangaroo care. The first one we know of who routinely practiced kangaroo care immediately after birth is Dr. Nils Bergman. He began his work in a mission hospital in Manamak, South Africa, where the survival rate for babies born between 1 and 1.5 kilograms was only 10% before starting kangaroo mother care at birth, but increased to 50% afterwards, with 100% breastfeeding rates and weight gain of 30 grams per day. Kangaroo care, kangaroo mother care actually, is a form of kangaroo care that involves almost continuous skin-to-skin contact and exclusive breastfeeding or breast milk feeding. In this hospital, feeds involve small volumes given every hour. Here's a graph that illustrates the change in survival for low birth weight babies before and after kangaroo mother care was established. The blue line is the survival rate for babies who got kangaroo mother care, and the pink is the survival rate of those who had not. It is easy to see the difference that kangaroo mother care made. Dr. Bergman acknowledges that kangaroo mother care makes great demands on mothers. He and his wife developed a wrap to help to hold the baby securely and safely to mother's body. Since then, there have been many other carriers developed to accomplish the same purpose. The important safety points to remember are that the airway is protected, the baby's body is flexed, and in this position, the baby can sleep safely and there is maximum skin-to-skin contact. What do we know about the safety of skin-to-skin contact? Safety for term newborns is well established, but safety for stable preterm infants is also well established. But what is the evidence for the safety of skin-to-skin contact for preterm infants immediately after birth? And what is the evidence for the safety of incubators for preterm infants immediately after birth? Incubators were first invented in 1889 in Germany and were used as sideshows, first in Berlin, Germany, and then in America, on Coney Island and in Chicago and at the New York World's Fairs. In 1939, the incubator was first patented by Dr. Charles Chappell from Philadelphia. Here is a picture of one of the sideshows of baby incubators with living babies. Mothers were given free admission, but were not allowed to hold or care for their premature babies. Now, we say we practice evidence-based medicine, but there was no evidence-based medicine when incubators were first used for babies. Incubators were widely used for preterm infants from 1889 and 1839, yet the first randomized controlled trial of any kind was done in 1948. Kangaroo care was first introduced in 1779, but remember that was late kangaroo care, and was first used immediately after birth in 1987. But the first randomized controlled trial of kangaroo mother care versus the incubator care wasn't done until 2004. Here's the title of the study Dr. Bergman did that involved preterm infants between 1,200 and 2,199 grams, so essentially 2,200 grams. Here are the demographics for each group. KMC stands for Kangaroo Mother Care, and CMC stands for Conventional Method of Care. Now, an evaluation of stability was done using a Scripps score, which documented heart rate, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation. 2 was the highest possible score, and 0 was the lowest possible score for each item. And every 5 minutes for the first 6 hours after birth, each baby was given a score, with a total of 6 being the most stable or the highest score, and 0 being the lowest. Babies born between 1,200 and 2,199 grams were randomized to either kangaroo mother care with mothers or conventional method of care with incubators. Here you can see a record of the Scripps scores for each group for the first 6 hours after birth. Babies in incubators had more fluctuating stability scores shown in the pink line, and none of them were completely stable at the end of 6 hours. While babies in skin-to-skin contact with their mothers had only slightly fluctuating stability scores shown in the blue line, and only for the first few hours. By 6 hours after birth, all of them were completely stable, skin-to-skin with their mothers. When looking at the whole group, Dr. Bergman found that 56% of babies who remained with their mothers from birth to 6 hours had perfect Scripps scores while only 11% of babies in incubators had perfect script scores during the entire time. At 6 hours after birth, 100% of babies in skin-to-skin contact had perfect script scores, while only 46% of babies in incubators were completely stable at the end of 6 hours. When he looked at the group of babies who were smaller and those who were perfectly stable from birth to 6 hours, 44% were stable if they were with their mother, but none of them were stable if they were in the incubator. And at 6 hours after birth, 100% of these smaller babies were perfectly stable with their mothers, while only 25% of babies in incubators were perfectly stable. When looking at the trends, we see that mothers seem to stabilize their preterm babies over time, while incubators seem to destabilize them. The conclusion of this first randomized controlled trial of mothers versus incubators was that kangaroo mother care started from birth is superior to incubators in stabilizing newborn infants born between 1,200 and 2,200 grams, as defined by heart rate, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation. Another way of saying this is that mothers are superior to incubators in stabilizing healthy preterm infants at birth. Now, this study was repeated in 2016 in a Vietnamese hospital with the same result, and it is entitled Newly Born Low Birth Weight Infants Stabilize Better in Skin-to-Skin Contact Than When Separated from Their Mothers, a randomized controlled trial. Many of the same benefits of skin-to-skin contact that are true for term infants also apply to preterm infants. It increases physiologic stability, including temperature stability, which is critical to the survival of low birth weight and premature infants. What's amazing is that each breath independently regulates mother's temperature for preterm babies just as it does for term babies. Several studies have shown that skin-to-skin contact leads to longer periods of quiet sleep with more regular sleep cycles. The quality of sleep and sleep cycles are directly linked to optimal brain development. And this is one of the reasons we can use to encourage dads to be involved in skin-to-skin contact. In addition to bonding and helping to improve physiologic stability, it can help their preterm infant's brain development. And I'd like to remind dads that and reassure them that it will do nothing to increase their milk supply. Skin-to-skin contact has been shown to be analgesic with reduced pain indicators during heel sticks in newborns after 15 minutes of skin-to-skin contact with mother. My first published study involved babies who were getting heel sticks, and results showed that being held by mother was even more analgesic than either a pacifier or breastfeeding. Skin-to-skin contact increases antibodies in mother's milk and decreases incidence and severity of nosocomial infections. Mothers produce antibodies and activated lymphocytes to pathogens in their environment, and they pass this immunity through their milk to their infants. Through skin-to-skin care with preterm infants in the NICU, mothers are exposed to pathogens in their newborn's environment, and they make antibodies to NICU pathogens as well. But this process requires skin-to-skin contact to colonize the mother. Mother can provide milk to her baby, and babies to get it in their stomach in order for this immune process to work. Skin-to-skin contact increases breast milk production by increasing prolactin levels. It's really important for mothers to pump their milk immediately after skin-to-skin contact to get the highest level of prolactin release. Skin-to-skin, preterm babies can also practice breastfeeding when they're at the breast. The goal is feeding at the breast before discharge. Skin-to-skin contact increases breastfeeding duration. Here you can see that breastfeeding at discharge and continuing to breastfeed after discharge are both higher for babies who got skin-to-skin contact in the NICU than for babies who did not. Skin-to-skin contact is associated with increased weight gain, with shorter hospital stays. It helps mothers to cope with the loss of a term pregnancy or a normal term birth. This mother of twins said, "My time in the NICU would have been unbearable without the hours I spent in the zero gravity chair holding her baby." Skin-to-skin contact helps bring babies back into contact with their mothers and continues their gestation outside the womb. It increases the parents' confidence and sense of confidence in handling their tiny infants. Skin-to-skin contact promotes parent-infant bonding. It's important to remember that there are many ways to hold a baby, even if skin-to-skin contact is not immediately possible. They can hold their babies with their hearts if they're far away at another hospital or just at home for the night. If a baby is absolutely too unstable to move, they can hold their babies with their eyes or hold them with their hands in therapeutic touch. Sometimes parents can hold their babies in their arms, but not skin to skin. But the ideal way with the most benefits to parent and baby is to hold the baby skin to skin. This can be done when a baby is intubated on a conventional ventilator or on high-frequency ventilator. Dr. Birdman has described skin-to-skin contact in the NICU as combining humanity with technology. Little baby Reed was born at 25 and 3/7 weeks gestation, weighing 625 grams. At 5 days, he's being held by his mother for the first time while he is still intubated on high-frequency jet ventilation. Baby Reed graduated from the NICU several months later, and when his mothers moved from the area, they wanted me to see how well Reed was doing at 9 months old. He was very bonded to his mother and had just weaned from breastfeeding at 9 months. He is growing into a thriving, happy little boy who loves his big brother and loves exploring the world. The take-home message today is that skin-to-skin contact is for all babies. The first hour after birth is indeed a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a sacred time. Something priceless happens during those first moments together when connectedness and trust are first experienced outside the womb. We know that this is not possible for every baby, and many of us in this room did not even get this special time with our own mothers, and we didn't get it with our own children. It is important to know that the first hour after birth is not the only time that bonding and attachment can occur. However, when it is missed, there is always a wounding that takes place that must be acknowledged and healed at a later time. Those first moments after birth are important, and we must not cavalierly rob mothers and babies of this unique experience unless it's for a very good reason. And if there is a very good reason, we must make every effort to get mother and baby reconnected again in skin-to-skin contact as soon as safely possible. Skin-to-skin contact is a practice we must honor and protect for the well-being of babies and parents. The research is clear and validates our experience. Babies belong with their mothers in as much skin-to-skin contact as possible. Babies in the NICU can survive without their parents, but they cannot heal and grow or thrive in the most optimal way, nor have the most optimal physical, neurological, or psychological development without their primary caregivers, usually their parents. We can no longer ignore the evidence that skin-to-skin in the NICU is essential in providing the highest level of care to the most vulnerable group of newborn infants. And it's up to us to encourage and facilitate this therapeutic experience for the babies we are caring for in the NICU. This is whole baby care, and it is our privilege to have the opportunity to provide it. Suzanne Arms, who is a gentle birth advocate, says, if we hope to create a nonviolent world where respect and kindness replace fear and hatred, we must begin with how we treat each other at the beginning of life, for that is where our deepest patterns are set. From these roots grow fear and alienation, or love and trust. I hope I've succeeded in sharing enough evidence to convince you that how a baby is welcomed into the world matters, that mothers and their newborns belong together, and that it is worth the effort to keep them together in uninterrupted skin-to-skin contact whenever possible. I want to thank you for all that you do to keep babies and mothers together immediately after birth whenever possible, and for bringing babies and mothers and fathers back together in the NICU, reconnecting them in skin-to-skin contact where they can best heal and grow and thrive. So happy International Kangaroo Awareness Day. Let's keep this happy tradition up.